She walked into the bank like someone invading enemy territory. 13 years old, school uniform, simple backpack, steady gaze. In her hand, a crumpled notebook. On her chest, something too big for words. She asked to open an account. Alone. No adult, no preambles. The employees laughed. The manager dodged the question. But she didn't run away. She came back the next day, and the next, and the next, as if the impossible was just a matter of persistence. With each visit, the discomfort grew. Not in her, but in them. Because no one understood why a girl from the outskirts kept insisting on something that wasn't for her. Some said it was a joke, others that it was a scam. But there was one man who began to watch more closely. Mark, a manager with a hard voice and a locked-up past. She didn't ask for help, but somehow he started to listen to her, and what seemed like just another persistent child became an uncomfortable mirror. This story has no caped heroes. It has a girl too small to carry so much weight, and a man too big to hide behind his name tag. It has silence, it has contempt, and it has a question that no one dared ask. What drives a child to cross the city? Just to open a bank account? She didn't tell. She didn't explain. She just kept coming back. And it was in the middle of this mystery that everything began to change. Because some truths don't need to be spoken. They just need to be noticed. You will see what happens when someone invisible refuses to disappear. When a girl with no famous last name breaks a system with perseverance. When pain doesn't show up directly, but reveals itself in the gaze, between the B lines in the circles it makes. And when a manager tired of himself allows himself to feel again. This story is about what is born from discomfort, about how a life changes when another life refuses to accept no, and about how sometimes what looks like stubbornness is just love disguised as courage. Courage that doesn't ask for permission, it just keeps coming back. And now the mystery remains. What exactly did this girl want? Why did she challenge so many gazes? And what did she know that no one else seemed to understand? You will find out, but not all at once. This story reveals its secrets little by little, like someone whispering instead of shouting, and only those who really pay attention will hear. Oh, Minnie.
Before diving into this exciting story, we want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our incredible content. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, now is the perfect time to do so. By subscribing, you'll become a valued member of our growing community, where we share amazing stories, insightful lessons, and much more. Don't wait any longer. Hit that subscribe button now and join us on this amazing journey.
Tasha's sneakers were worn out. The left shoelace no longer held properly, but she kept moving forward, stepping carefully on the wet sidewalks of downtown Atlanta. The morning cold pierced through her thin jeans and the plain t-shirt with the faded blue school name embroidered on it. When she reached the front of the Peach Bank branch in the city's financial district, she stopped for a moment. She stared at the automatic glass doors as if they were a portal to another world, a world that didn't seem made for someone like her. Inside, the air conditioning was strong, and the background music was soft but impersonal. Everything felt too new, too white, too rich. Digital panels announced credit rates and promotions for premium account holders. Tasha gripped the strap of her backpack tightly. Inside, she carried homemade milk candies in a small blue notebook. She walked up to the reception. "Excuse me, I wanted to know how to open an account." The attendant, a white woman with blonde hair tied up in a tight bun, didn't even look up. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked curtly. Tasha shook her head. "No. I just need to know how it works." The woman sighed discreetly. She pointed to a line nearby without offering any further explanation. A security guard, black, observed everything from the corner of the room with a neutral gaze. In the background, 2 young employees laughed near the counter. "She came by herself?" one of them whispered. "Probably selling candy around here. I've seen this before." Tasha heard. She pretended not to. She sat down in one of the dark leather chairs, her gaze fixed on the tip of her own sneaker. From her backpack, she pulled out the blue notebook. The pages were marked with pencil. Social security number, ID required, savings or checking account. Her childish handwriting tried to translate what she had overheard from people on the street. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she couldn't give up. The plan was clear: save the money from the sales, collect pennies by pennies, and one day, pay for her mother's surgery. That's why she was there, not for luxury, but for necessity. Across the room, a man in a gray suit watched from a distance. It was the manager, Mark. He had seen her on the sidewalk before, selling candy near the subway. Now, inside the bank, she seemed even more out of place. Security, he muttered to himself. That's what's missing. But when his gaze met Tasha's, something unsettled him. An old feeling, almost forgotten. Before leaving, Tasha tried once more. She walked back to the counter. "Sorry. Can you just explain what I need to bring to open an account?" The attendant didn't hide her disdain. "Come back with a guardian, okay? This isn't a place to play bank." Tasha swallowed hard. She didn't argue. She simply tightened her backpack on her back and left. Outside, the cold wind blew between the tall buildings. She stopped on the sidewalk and looked back. Her reflection in the bank's glass was small, lonely, but firm. That morning, she hadn't been able to open the account, but she had opened something much more important: the certainty that she would return. Because no matter how automatic the door was, the hearts inside seemed locked from the inside. In the following days, Tasha returned to the bank, always at the same time between the end of class and early afternoon. It was when the sun streamed through the mirrored glass windows, reflecting a city in motion, hurried, indifferent. Every time she passed through the automatic doors of Peach Bank, a new weight settled on her shoulders. She knew she wasn't welcome there, but she also knew that sometimes persistence is the only way to exist. She always wore the same navy blue public school uniform, now wrinkled and stained with sugar from the candy she sold. Her hair was tied up in the same simple bun, her gaze increasingly focused on the details: the hours, the names on the badges, the promotional posters. She already knew the order of the tellers by heart, and she understood, without needing to hear, what the look said when she approached her again. Is she going to ask for money? Doesn't she get it? On the second day, she tried to talk to a new Latina employee who seemed more approachable. "Hi, good afternoon. I just need to know what I need to open a checking account." The woman smiled slightly but quickly corrected herself, as if remembering the unspoken rules of that place. "I think you'll need to talk to the branch manager." And she pointed to the glass-walled office where Mark was talking to a client in a dark suit. Tasha thanked her, but she knew that suggestion was just a polite way of saying, "Come back later," or never again. On the third day, they didn't even hide their discomfort. A white employee named Connor, with his loose tie and a sarcastic smile, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Is this little girl on a banking tour or what?" Muted laughter echoed behind him. Tasha didn't respond. She just looked. Her brown eyes, large and steady, said more than any argument could. Connor looked away first, but the humiliation had already been made. On the fourth day, Tasha entered but didn't speak to anyone. She simply sat in the chair by the glass wall. She opened the notebook, reread everything, and wrote a new sentence. "No one's going to explain why they think I can't." Silent tears rolled down, but she quickly wiped them away with the sleeve of her shirt. She didn't want pity, she wanted access. She wanted the right to try, to be heard, to exist beyond the statistics. It was on this day that Mark started watching more closely. He saw her arrive. He saw her sit. He saw her leave without saying a word. And he felt something strange. Discomfort. Not for her, but for himself. For the coldness with which he had been ignoring that little spark of courage that kept crossing his path. Still, he said nothing. And as Tasha left the bank for the fourth time, the silence that hung in the lobby was more cruel than any spoken word. On her fifth visit, something different happened. Tasha had barely entered the bank when she heard her name being called, in a firm, almost suspicious voice. "Miss Tasha Williams." She turned slowly. It was the manager, Mark, the man in the gray suit with his cold gaze and impeccable posture, was now standing at the door of his glass-walled office, holding a clipboard as though carrying a verdict. Behind him, the tellers exchanged surprised glances. None of them knew she had a name. Mark led her into his office without smiling. The room was sterile, decorated in neutral tones, with framed certificates on the walls. In the corner, a coffee machine hissed quietly. Tasha sat in the leather chair with no backrest, her trembling hands hidden under the desk. He stood for a few seconds before sitting down, as though weighing the situation before speaking. "You've been coming here for days, right?" She nodded. "And why do you keep insisting?" His voice was dry, but there was a curiosity hidden behind his stiffness. Tasha took a deep breath. She looked down at her knees. "Because I need to." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Need what exactly?" She slowly lifted her eyes. "To know how to open an account." He crossed his arms and leaned back. "You know it's not common for a girl your age to do this alone, right?" His tone was doubtful, almost accusatory. "Most kids your age are on TikTok." Tasha didn't laugh. She simply replied calmly, "I don't have time for that." The silence between them lingered. Mark glanced at the crumpled notebook she had brought. Underlined phrases, words in cursive. "Is this yours?" She nodded. "Did you write all this?" "Yes, sir." He flipped through it carefully and saw an unlikely organization. Each technical term, routing number, minimum balance, monthly fee, written with effort. This didn't seem like a game, not a cry for attention. It seemed like a necessity. Mark slowly closed the notebook and placed his hands on the table. "Do you have anyone with you, an adult, parent, guardian?" Tasha hesitated. "My mom is sick, and my dad doesn't live with us." Mark leaned back a little in his chair, his eyes locked with hers. There was no anger, no tears, just firmness, a kind of maturity he didn't expect to find in that girl with the simple backpack and serene voice. He could have ended it there. He could have said, "I'm sorry, come back with a guardian." But he didn't. He just kept looking. Something about it bothered him. It wasn't Tasha. It was the feeling of being in front of someone who, even so young, already knew the weight of rejection. And for the first time, Mark found himself without a ready answer. When Tasha stood up to leave, he stopped her with a subtle gesture. "Come back tomorrow, I'll think about how to help you." The next morning, Mark arrived earlier than usual at the bank. He wasn't quite sure why. Maybe it was Tasha's expression that had followed him home the night before. Or maybe it was the notebook, still on his desk, with the fragile notes, of a girl who shouldn't have to carry so much weight. The fact is, that day he was already waiting for her when she walked through the revolving door. She seemed surprised to see him there, but didn't show fear. She simply walked toward him, as if accepting a silent invitation. In the glass-walled office, Mark offered her coffee. She declined. He pointed to the chair. She sat, and for the first time, there was no tension in the air, only a strange kind of respect. "Tasha," he began, his voice less firm than usual, "I want to understand. Why is this so important to you? Why this insistence?" Tasha looked down at her hands, then lifted her eyes filled with a raw maturity. "Because my mom is going to die, if I don't do something." Mark didn't respond immediately. Tasha continued, her voice low, without any sense of victimhood. "She has a heart disease. She needs surgery. We tried Medicaid, but there's a wait list, there are requirements, there's waiting. I sell candy to help, but keeping the money at home isn't safe. We've been robbed once already." She paused. "I thought that if I had an account, I could save the money properly, show that I'm trying, that I'm responsible." There was more than just desperation in her words. There was strategy. There was dignity. Mark leaned back in his chair. His hardened expression seemed to crack from within. "And no one can do this for you?" Tasha shook her head. "My dad sends a check every month, just enough for food. But he disappeared when she got sick. I'm the oldest." Mark swallowed hard. The weight of those words wasn't just emotional. It was familiar. He too knew abandonment. He too knew helplessness in the face of illness. And there, sitting across from that 13-year-old girl, he saw a shadow of the boy he once was. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. Mark looked out the window. The bank continued its rhythm. Tellers laughing at something on their phones. Customers waiting for electronic numbers. Background music playing lifeless jazz. But inside that room, everything was suspended. There was only the raw pain of Tasha, and the distant memory of a pain Mark tried to forget. "Do you really think you can get that money by yourself?" Tasha didn't hesitate. "I have to, because no one else is going to try." It was in that moment that something broke. Mark didn't say anything. But the way he looked at Tasha changed. For the first time, he saw her fully. Not as an insistent girl, but as someone fighting against a system that was never meant for her. And when she stood to leave, there was no goodbye. Just a shared look, an invisible pact. As if something important had been said, even in the silence. That night, Mark drove slowly through the streets of Buckhead, as if he didn't want to get home. The car headlights reflected off the glass buildings, but nothing seemed clear. He was there physically, but his mind wandered to memories he tried to avoid visiting. When he stopped at a traffic light, he looked at the passenger seat and saw something that made him shudder. Tasha's blue notebook. He had forgotten to return it. He hesitated before flipping through it. Among the notes, he found a folded piece of paper. "If I can save everything, she'll have a chance." It hit him like a dry punch to the chest. When he got home, the kids were asleep. His ex-wife had sent a brief message. "Don't forget Jack's school presentation tomorrow." He passed by the rooms, looked at the children's sleeping faces, and something tore him inside. They had everything. Clean clothes, hot food, their own room. But he was absent. Present on paper, but absent where it mattered most. Tasha's look hours earlier echoed in his mind like a voice he couldn't silence. "I have to find a way." Mark sat down in the living room, with the whiskey bottle beside him and the notebook on his lap. He remembered his own mother. Her heart had failed too. He remembered the ambulances that never arrived in time, the public hospital where she waited for hours to be seen. His father, broken inside, who couldn't afford the treatment and disappeared into silence. He was a teenager when she died, and no one taught him how to cope with that. So he learned to ignore it, to silence it, to harden himself. The success at the bank became his shield. But the emptiness never left. The tears came without warning, one at a time, as if each one carried the weight of years barely digested. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt shame, not for his origins, but for the distance he had created between himself and the man he had become. A man who had gotten used to seeing requests as noise, who learned to filter others' pain to keep his own intact. But Tasha had pierced that barrier, and he knew he could no longer pretend. The next morning, he arrived early at the bank. But this time, it wasn't to hit quotas or approve loans. It was to meet himself. Standing at the glass door, he watched the reflection of his own face. He didn't see the manager. He saw the son of a woman who died without help, and in the background, the shadow of a girl who wasn't begging for charity. She was fighting for something bigger. And for the first time, he didn't think as a boss. He thought as a son. He entered, sat at the desk, and opened his computer. He searched for everything he could about medical assistance, community organizations, and subsidized heart surgeries, because something inside him had awakened. And it wasn't just empathy. It was debt. It was memory. It was the chance to do for someone what no one did for him. Mark spent the week with a new habit, observing Tasha from a distance. Every afternoon she would appear coming from school, with her worn-out backpack on her back and the blue notebook pressed against her chest. She sold candy in front of the 5-point station, then walked to the bank. Sometimes she entered, sometimes she just watched from afar. She never begged. She never complained. There was something about that constant presence that disarmed any corporate logic. She was just a girl, but she carried the world with a poise that many adults never learned. Without telling his colleagues, Mark started gathering information. He discreetly spoke to a nurse at a community hospital in Decatur. He reached out to contacts at NGOs that support mothers in vulnerable situations. He called 2 healthcare industry acquaintances who still owed him favors. All of this without mentioning names. He still didn't know exactly how to act, but he knew he had to do something. For the first time in years, his resources weren't being used to grow. They were being used to care. Inside the bank, the environment remained the same. Digitalized, automated, cold. But now Mark saw the contrasts. He noticed how every employee made a point of ignoring Tasha when she entered. How security was discreetly called whenever she stayed too long. How the jokes kept going. But now they hit differently for him. "This little girl should get a TikTok and stop playing adult," a young intern murmured. Mark heard it. He looked up, didn't say a word, but the look he gave silenced the whole room. One afternoon, while Tasha was writing something on the sidewalk, Mark approached through the side door. He was dressed simply, no blazer, no badge. "You still want to open that account?" The question was direct, but the tone almost paternal. Tasha looked up, surprised. She nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, glancing around. "Let's make this happen. But I'll need some of your patience." She smiled for the first time, a shy, corner-of-the-mouth smile, but real. And that was stronger than any goal he had hit in the past few months. The next day, he scheduled a meeting with a personal account manager. He gave clear instructions. Be kind, listen, and don't withhold any information. For the first time, Tasha was treated with respect inside the bank. She sat down with someone who listened, who explained, who wrote alongside her. Mark watched everything from a distance, standing in the doorway. He didn't intervene. He didn't take credit. But inside he knew he was part of the change. That night at home, Mark found the children drawing in the living room. Jack, the youngest, showed a doodle with 3 figures holding hands. "It's me, you, and a man with a backpack. Is he the new friend?" Mark smiled and responded with a choked voice. "He's someone who reminded me how important it is to pay attention." He knew there was still much to be done, but at that moment something had changed. Because empathy, when it's real, doesn't need applause. It just needs action. On Saturday morning, Mark got in his car and drove south to Atlanta. The GPS pointed to a neighborhood he had rarely heard of and had never visited. The narrow streets, with uneven sidewalks and weathered wooden houses with peeling paint, contrasted sharply with the glass buildings he frequented during the week. With every mile, he felt more out of place, not out of fear, but out of shame. It was as if he was entering a world that the system he worked for did everything to forget. Tasha was waiting for him in front of a rusty fence, wearing the same school shirt and holding a grocery bag. When she saw him get out of the car, she gave a nod. No formal greetings, no ceremony. She simply opened the gate and guided him inside. The house was small, with old furniture, and a mix of freshly baked cake and expired medicine in the air. The tube TV crackled in the background. But there was something there that Mark hadn't felt in a long time. Human warmth, truth, simplicity. Tasha's mother was sitting on the sofa, covered with a thin sheet and wearing a colorful headscarf. Her eyes brightened when she saw the visitor. She tried to get up, but Mark made a gentle gesture. "Please, make yourself comfortable." She smiled, tired, but whole. "You're the man from the bank, right?" He nodded. "Mark." She extended her hand. "Nice to meet you. My name is Angela." Her voice was weak but firm, like someone who had been through many storms and learned to stay standing, even while lying down. During their conversation, Angela explained the diagnosis: a severe heart condition. The surgery needed to be done at a private hospital because the waiting list at the public system was too long. She didn't complain. She just laid out the facts with a dignity that moved Mark. "I don't want pity," she said, looking him in the eyes. "I just want time. Time to see my daughters grow." Those words kept ringing in his mind. They weren't dramatic. They were real, human, urgent. Mark noticed every detail: the fridge with school magnets, the worn Bible open to Psalms, the reused jars as cups, and a black and white photograph. A younger version of Angela beside two small girls, Tasha and her sister. He looked at the photo, then at Tasha, and understood something deep. She wasn't fighting for a miracle. She was fighting for continuity. For a chance not to lose the ones who had always stood by her. Before leaving, Mark turned to Angela and said, with a voice firmer than he expected, "I'm going to help." She stared at him, surprised. "I don't know how yet, but I will." It wasn't an empty promise, it was a silent commitment. On the way back, as the GPS recalculated the route, Mark processed what he felt: a mixture of helplessness, responsibility, and a long-forgotten desire to be part of something that truly mattered. On the following Monday, Tasha arrived in front of the bank with a box of homemade candy, made by her and her sister. It was early. The sun had barely risen over the horizon of Atlanta, but she was already there, with her backpack on her shoulders, and a handwritten sign that read, "Sweet Hope to help my mom." When Mark saw her from the second-floor window, something inside him both broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. This was no longer about numbers or accounts. It was about dignity, about faith, about not letting someone face the impossible, alone. That morning, he went down before the bank even opened to the public. He wore a sweater instead of his usual suit. He crossed the lobby, ignoring the curious glances, and stopped in front of Tasha. "Did you bring change?" She smiled. "Yes, sir. 5 and 10. He took 2 packs of peanut fudge, left an envelope in the corner of the box, and whispered, "Don't open it now. It's just a start." Tasha didn't ask. She simply nodded, with moist eyes. She understood. When help comes from silence, it's because it comes from the heart. Hours later, Mark called his team together and announced a decision no one expected. Starting today, the exterior area of the bank can be used by local entrepreneurs, as long as they follow basic hygiene and safety rules. He didn't offer any explanations. He didn't accept questions. He simply said, "It's the least we can do." Connor, the same employee who had previously mocked Tasha, fell silent. For the first time, perhaps, he understood that the world doesn't revolve around those with golden badges. That same day, Mark called an old acquaintance, the manager of an institution offering community microcredits. He explained the situation, omitted names but made it clear. This family needs help. Discreet, quick, dignified. At the same time, he opened an account in Angela's name, with the documents he personally helped Tasha gather. He donated a substantial amount, enough to cover part of the surgery. But he recorded it as personal support, not linking it to the bank. He wanted it to be human, not institutional. When Tasha learned the news, she didn't say much. She simply asked to use the bank's phone and called home. "Mom, we're closer." On the other end of the line, Angela cried silently. It wasn't relief. It was gratitude. It was knowing that her daughter was being heard, finally. Later, while Tasha sold her candy at the corner of the sidewalk, her younger sister came running with a bow in her hair and a big smile. "They really let you?" Tasha hugged the little one and answered with teary eyes. They did. That late afternoon, the Atlanta sky turned golden. There was no celebration, no newspaper headline. But there, in that little piece of hot concrete, a 13-year-old black girl achieved something rare. She transformed pain into action, and unknowingly, taught a middle-aged white man that generosity is not charity, it is restitution. And that, sometimes all it takes is to give a small space for an entire life to bloom. It was a Wednesday night when Mark parked his car in front of a modest house in Marietta. The streetlight flickered, the yard was poorly kept, and the rusty mailbox still bore the family name, Holloway. It had been almost 6 years since he'd crossed that sidewalk. The reason for the distance? Small arguments that grew like weeds after their father's death. Crossed words, prideful silence, wounds that no one had the courage to heal. But now, something inside him screamed that it was time to return. On the other side of the door, it was Joshua, the middle brother, who answered. He had more gray in his hair, deep circles under his eyes, and the same college team t-shirt. When he saw Mark, he froze. "I thought you had forgotten we existed." Mark took a deep breath. "I almost did, but I'm trying to remember now." The tone was simple, but true. No defenses, no speeches. Joshua opened the door, and the gesture was, "Enough." Inside, their younger sister, Rachel, cried when she saw him. "You missed my daughter's baptism." He lowered his head. "I missed a lot of things." As the impromptu dinner was served, rice, roasted chicken, and plastic cups, Mark listened more than he spoke. He asked about the nieces and nephews, about his siblings' jobs, about their mother, who now lived with Rachel. They told him without bitterness how they had tried to reach out to him during the difficult years, and he, with rare honesty, admitted, "I hid behind work. It was easier to control spreadsheets than emotions." The silence that followed was thick but necessary. Sometimes it's not the request for forgiveness that heals. It's the recognition of absence. The following week, Mark took his kids to the park for the first time in months. He hadn't planned anything grand, just frisbees, a blanket, and some juice boxes. Jack and Noah ran around as if it were the first time they had ever seen their father without a cell phone in hand. Mark watched them with a lump in his throat. They didn't say anything, but he knew. He knew that in silence those kids had felt his distance, and that now they were learning to trust again. On the way home, Jack fell asleep in the back seat, clutching a drawing of a tree. On the paper, 3 stick figures. Me, Dad, and Noah. Mark kept it like someone keeps a treasure. That night, before going to bed, he looked at his bookshelf, filled with banking awards, certificates, performance recognition. All clean, shining. And next to it, a scribbled envelope with a pencil, written by Tasha. "Thank you for listening to me." That was worth more than any year-end bonus. Reconnecting with his family didn't erase the mistakes, but it showed Mark that true wealth wasn't in the accounts he managed. It was in the connections he had neglected, and that now, slowly, were beginning to be rebuilt. Because sometimes, when you extend your hand to someone invisible, you realize you've been the one who disappeared. The hospital was located in the northern part of Atlanta in Sandy Springs. It was modern, with wide hallways, white walls, and the smell of disinfectant that filled the chest. Angela arrived with Tasha and her younger sister, both dressed simply, but with their hair neatly arranged. It was the first time they had entered a private hospital. They weren't stopped at the reception. They didn't need to explain why they were there. Everything had already been paid for, and no one asked questions because someone finally had cared enough to take responsibility for them. In the waiting room, Mark arrived shortly after, without a suit. He wore jeans, a gray sweatshirt, and carried 2 coffees. He handed one to Tasha, who was shaking slightly. "It's going to be okay," he said. She looked at the floor, then at the surgery room door. "She's all I have." Mark didn't respond immediately. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder. "You're all she has too, and that has saved her life more times than you realize." The words hung in the air like a silent prayer. There was nothing more to say. 5 hours passed in wait. Long, silent hours, interrupted by whispered prayers, doodles by the little sister, and memories that hit like waves in the chest. Mark stayed the whole time. He didn't answer any calls from the bank, he didn't check emails, he simply waited. And when the doctor appeared with a slight smile and a thumbs up, Tasha couldn't hold back her tears. She threw herself into Mark's arms as if she didn't know how else to thank him. He simply held her without words. Sometimes silence carries everything that words cannot reach. In the following days, Angela recovered well. She returned home with a chest marked by scars, but with a heart beating stronger than ever. Tasha went back to selling candy, not out of immediate need, but by choice. She wanted to save money to one day help other mothers like hers. Mark continued to be present. He created a supported microcredit program for low-income families. He trained employees to treat people with dignity and respect. He revamped the bank's customer service. But he didn't announce any of it on social media. He did it in silence, as someone who understands that true change doesn't need applause. On a warm afternoon, Tasha appeared at the bank with her sister and a new box of candy. Connor, the employee who had once mocked her, smiled awkwardly. "Hey, Tasha, welcome." She responded lightly. "Thanks. I came to leave some packages." The manager said today was sharing day, and in the back of the lobby, Mark watched the scene with teary eyes, because she understood it all. That sharing isn't giving away what's left over. It's making space. It's remembering the other. It's giving back what was once denied to you. And so in that bank where everything had begun with looks of contempt, a new story was now being written. A story of pain that became a bridge, of silence that became a gesture, of an invisible girl who changed everything without ever raising her voice. Tasha never screamed, never begged. She simply insisted with the strength of someone who knows they need to be heard. And in the end, it wasn't the money or the system that made the difference. It was the courage to keep coming back. It was the silent faith of a girl who seemed too small, but was giant on the inside. She didn't change the world, but she changed someone's world. And sometimes, that's all that matters. Because there are stories that don't make headlines, but they make bridges. Mark didn't become a saint, but he stepped down from the pedestal the system had put him on. He learned that empathy isn't a favor, it's a responsibility. And true power isn't what commands, it's what listens. He reconnected with his own family, looked at his children with new eyes, not because someone forced him to, but because a girl made him remember who he was. A girl who didn't want attention. She just wanted a chance. This story doesn't end with applause. It ends with work, with continuity, with a box of candy being sold in front of a bank, where once only closed doors existed, with policies changing, attitudes changing, gazes changing, and all because someone decided not to stay silent in the face of indifference. Tasha didn't just save her mother. She saved the right to dream. and showed that when one life is respected, many others are transformed together. Everything begins when someone, even without knowing it, becomes impossible to ignore. And now a question remains. How many stories like this pass you by every day without you noticing? How many people are fighting in silence, just waiting for someone to see them? And what will you do the next time someone out of place crosses your path? Because maybe, just maybe, that person is carrying more than they seem. And maybe what they need most is someone who decides to listen, not to change the entire world, but to change theirs. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel, activate the bell, and share it with someone who needs to hear this.